Now, it is my honor to open the 4th annual WISC with a speech by Kunal Shah, founder and chairman of Free Charge. Kunal is a serial entrepreneur, having started as a teenager selling t-shirts and mixtapes. After having founded slightly more formal ventures like Pesa Back, a cashback promotion tool, he then started Free Charge in 2010, along with co-founder Sandeep Tandon. It was acquired in 2015 by Snapdeal. Kunal is still chairman of the company and leads strategy and acquisitions. He holds a bachelor in philosophy from Mumbai's Wilson College. Ladies and gentlemen, Kunal Shah.
Hello, everyone. One of the things that was not mentioned in my introduction, I'm also an MBA dropout from NMIMS. It's interesting when this introduction was made, I heard the word competition at least 7-8 times. And that's the exact thing that kind of erodes value and prevents wealth creation. A lot of times, we tend to forget that when companies are being created or startups are being formed, only if it's allowed to kind of take a full shape and form without having an hyper-competitive environment, it's when it creates wealth. Today, it's funny, when we took our first investment and Sequoia is here, we were approached by multiple investors and we met Sequoia for the first time and we liked them, we picked them. One of the conditions we had put for them to invest in a company is that to not announce the investment in the company for the next 1 year. And that was unusual request coming from a company, and I thought it was unusual that nobody had requested for that before. And I think that is the metric that I have never understood from India founders. A lot of times they are too eager to come on PR for winning competition, being there, and exposing their idea and their IP to a lot of people before they have built a strong company. Till 2014, not a single e-commerce report covered Free Charge or any of the category players as a credible e-commerce company, although we were doing more transactions than all e-commerce companies put together, because it was not a category that was not copied from the West or East for that matter. And interestingly, I was very happy about it, that nobody's covering us in the report and nobody's talking about it. We were not very eager to come in PR. And I just find a lot of time before you build interesting moats or create a critical mass of consumers, a lot of times founders are getting into the trap of being known too quickly, constantly putting social media updates, and also to the disturbing trend that I feel is having a very fancy office with the Series A that they have raised. Like, I still remember, our office, Kunal and Rohit from Snapdeal had come to our office before the exit, and the office was pretty shitty. And I was asked that, and we had raised serious capital by that time, but not used towards creating an office. And I told them that not a single customer will use our platform because we have a good office. And that was the obvious thing for me. I believe the same thing applies to great talent as well. I don't think great talent wants to come for great office. They want to come for great work. And it was quite interesting. And I think there were a few observations along the line. We sold the company, I think we're going to be probably 2 years now in March. And one of the largest exits. But interestingly, there are some learnings that I had through the journey. A couple of interesting ones were that in India, every household has a chief technology officer, and that person is in the age group of 12 to 18. The chief technology officer is consulted by everybody to ask them on which apps to download, how do we do this, what do we do, and apparently, but slowly and surely, the chief technology officer is becoming the chief procurement officer, because that person understands technology, right? And I see very few brands being able to relate to that TG, thinking that, oh, our TG is 30 years old chief wage earner. And don't understand that the technology penetration in the household in India is happening with this teenager, right? Another interesting trend that I have observed is the classic mistrust in India. And I have not understood that quite well. Here's my hypothesis around that. In India, every transaction is laced with massive mistrust. We don't trust each other for every transaction. For example, when we get a bill at a restaurant, everybody checks the total before they pay. When we give our car for servicing, we empty the fuel tank and give the car for servicing. We don't ask for checks, we ask for demand drafts. And it's funny, even our Bollywood scenes, the kidnapping scene is not where they say, drop the money and the person will be delivered tomorrow. It is exactly the scene where you say, ek haath le, ek haath de, right? And you see the scene where the two people come together. And that's kind of weird, because when I went to West and I was looking at this, nobody had that kind of behavior. It was default over here to mistrust, and it was kind of okay to kind of pay without checking. And I realized that why is this the situation? There are many, many reasons that one can think about. We call ourselves that we are one country, but we are basically 24 different countries stitched together to become one country. We don't speak the same language, have the same kind of food. We don't necessarily trust everybody in the ecosystem. And interestingly, what I found is that the easiest way to create trust was to just give trust. And I'll give you a couple of examples that we did. It was very common for employees to take your offer letters and not join the company. And I never understood that trend. They would not even inform you that they're not going to join you, and they don't just disappear during the joining date period, and usually take another offer by that time. What we did is, with every offer letter that we gave a MacBook along with that. Now, what it did is just rewired the whole trust-based, mistrust-based ecosystem. When somebody gave a MacBook with an offer letter, my HR person asked me that, hey, Kunal, we are doing this crazy experiment. What happens if the guy runs away with the MacBook? I was like, it's a great cost to pay versus getting an unethical employee joining the company. And then it kind of worked out. And we almost had 0 attrition rate after we started doing this experiment. Because people, on an average, started working 2 weeks before joining date, before they actually had a salary kicking in. They were already working for us, and they're like, we want to come and to work in office, come to work for you at weekends and do something for you. And multiple such experiments were done where we actually rewired trust by actually showing trust. And I have been doing that consistently. In fact, to the point that we have seen with consumers also that a lot of times that when you give your trust to them as a brand, they do a lot more for you. And therefore, we never had a challenge. A small example was on our free charge platform, when you do a top-up or a bill payment, your credit card details and debit card details are saved. And normally in the West, usually they ask you that, would you like to save these details, and would you like to trust the platform for doing that? When we did that experiment, we did an A/B experiment, and we asked that, let's in one case ask that step, and in second step not ask for that details and see what happens. We observed that consumers did not want that friction, but whenever the cards did not show up the second time, they had a massive issue with it. So when we think about mistrust, we think of the Western frameworks, right, on what should be the case. But in the Indian consumer, they want convenience more than the trust-based things that we kind of take from, or the understanding of privacy, or understanding of what the consumers want in the West. For example, a classic example, a lot of companies initially used to say, add to cart and check out. Most Indians don't understand these terms, because we've never added anything to the cart and never gone to a checkout. We have a trolley and we have a billing counter, right? And a lot of times when we are just copying things from the West, it creates a massive issue. Another example is, when we look at India, actually I'll talk about an incident. I was at IIM Bangalore alum event last week, and I asked the audience, it was like probably 400 people, how many of you know your salary per hour? Only 2 people raised their hands. Now, the challenge of that is because nobody in India never ever got an hourly salary. We never learned the math unit of calculating what our income or value is per hour, and therefore our decisions to take per hour is not the same. What we've observed is that countries that are time poor are trained because of these early trainings of what your hour is worth, and otherwise we don't create time poor things. So for example, in India, it's very common behavior for somebody to spend 30 minutes to look for a 100 rupees discount on a flight ticket. And you wonder, why would you do that if you're flying? Because the thing is that nobody understands, what do I do with my 30 minutes if I'm going to save that, right? And that is something that I have found very fascinating, and I've asked this at every conference. Less than 1% people know what their value per hour is, and therefore don't take very good decisions when it comes to, and therefore when we are selling convenience to the Indian audience, it's not going to necessarily work because they don't value their time as much, right? And that is something that it comes through multiple experiences that we've observed, that people would disproportionately waste time to get a little benefit because they don't understand the math behind it, right? They don't understand the trade-offs really well. Interestingly, what has come to my understanding is that when we are copying models from the West and East, they're easy to get funded because it pattern matches to a lot of the stuff that is happening in the West. But what works over here is kind of different, right? And what I did is created a framework through multiple meetings with different startups. I had time for the last 1.5 years to visit different ecosystems and came up with a framework. So here's how it works. I'll just ask a question before I do that. Which goods and services were more efficient 10 years ago? Which goods and services were more efficient 10 years ago? Anybody wants to guess? Nothing? Okay. Anybody else? All right. Now imagine yourself as an animal who's a lion or a tiger, and I ask you the same question, that what was more efficient for you 10 years ago? You will say pretty much the same, because you're waiting for evolution to make you better. And it's a slow process. Humans are hacking that process by creating these tools and services and constantly making them more efficient. So today is the most efficient state. Tomorrow will be more efficient, right? But a lot of times we don't understand these things from a startup lens, and I'll tell you how that works. How many of you are from India, staying in India? Please raise your hand. Okay, so you guys will probably relate to this. If I have to ask you a score of efficiency out of 10 from, let's say, booking a railway ticket at a railway station versus booking a railway ticket online, what would be the score out of 10? Anybody wants to just go with that? Anybody who's done both the experiences? 2 and 8. Anybody else wants to give me a score? 4 and 8. So what you'll observe is that whenever the delta of efficiency is greater than 4, 3 things happen. It creates an irreversible behavior. You don't go back to a railway platform after trying the online platform. It results in high tolerance. Even if IRCTC is not working, slow, painful, down for 2 hours, you're not going to go back to the old behavior. And 3, you will do something called as UBP, as I call it, is unique brag-worthy proposition. Anybody achieves the new state and discovers something that is delta 4, tells everybody in the previous state and says that, hey, why don't you try this new platform? Like, imagine you have tried the online railway platform and somebody's like, I'm going to railway platform to book a ticket. You're like, dude, what are you doing? Try this. We brag about things that are delta 4. Let me ask you another question. How many of you use Truecaller? Truecaller? Know about Truecaller? Okay. How many of you have downloaded Truecaller because of an ad that you saw? Nobody. I'll tell you how you discover Truecaller. Somebody came to you and say, tell me any number. I'll tell you the name of the person. Or did a magic trick demo for you. That is the unique brag-worthy proposition. These companies, when they achieve delta 4, don't require advertising dollars as much, right? But I'll give you some more examples that will kind of make it interesting. So let's talk about booking cabs the old way versus Ola/Uber. What would be the scores be? More like same, 2.8, 4.8, that's delta 4. Let me ask you another question. buying shirts at an offline store, buying shirts online. Give me your score now, out of 10. Don't have to be right, it's your score. 5 and 7? 6 and 8? 6 and 6? It's amazing, it's kind of going there. Somebody's gonna say now 8 and 6, anybody? 9 and 4, somebody is there, okay. What you'll observe, if I aggregate the score of this, it'll probably be 1, probably 0, sometimes -1. What happens is startups, what they do is they say, oh, there's a behavior, I'm gonna make that digital, and here's wealth coming for me. But whenever it's not Delta 4, it tends to become hard motivation. I'll tell you what happens with products and services that are not Delta 4. A, you'll observe that nobody brags about it. No, people have very, very low tolerance for it. One time somebody will ship you a shirt with wrong fitment, you're like, never trying it again. Right? Obviously, we tend to go back to the old behavior as soon as we have a bad experience, right? Interestingly, these companies tend to do a hack to make themselves Delta 4. Can you tell me what do they do? Anybody wants to guess over here? Discounts, cashbacks, recharge, talk time. What happens is that companies like Uber doing discounts and companies like a shirt selling discounts is not the same, because an Uber or an Ola is creating an irreversible behavior. But a shirt buying platform is not. And therefore, they temporarily create a Delta 4, which creates trials, but does not create a new behavior. And that is something that I have observed to be consistently true. What I've done is obviously asked many universities to probe this and find holes in this theory to say that hey, this company was never Delta 4, but still made it and created wealth. Yes, there are many companies that stay Delta 1, Delta 2, and Delta 4 companies take advantage of them. Anybody wants to guess this example? When two Delta 1 companies compete, a Delta 4 company taking advantage of it. Somebody said it already. Google and Facebook. Sorry, what did you say? Myntra and Flipkart. Who's taking advantage of them? Sorry? No. A different dimension company takes an advantage of them. That's a Times of India, which charges them a full page ad. Or a Google, which sells the both customers to both of them, right? And so on and so forth. A Truecaller never needed to do a full page ad in Times of India, or a TV ad, or even a Google ad. And it's kind of fascinating when you think about this, that there are Delta 4 companies that help people think about these things, that I'll move you in that new state because I have all these captive customers. Why don't you piggyback with us and we'll get you those guys? Does not change behavior, right? So this is the kind of state that I have seen, and I feel a lot of pain for investors. One company working out of 10 gives them enough returns, but I know many people who are in that 9 who've not done, and they don't feel good about themselves in life. And if they apply basic principles and pick good ideas to work on, I think they can do pretty well. My personal hope is that even if that 90% failure rate becomes, I don't know, 70% failure rate, will create great progress and humanity will move forward. So that's all from me. I'm taking questions after this. Thank you. You want to do it without the mic? That's fine.
Yeah, I'll just say it. Yeah. Hi, Kunal, thanks for the wonderful speech. There are a few questions coming in. So the first question which has come in from the audience is that startups have to start thinking about monetization. So what would be a good time for startups to actually move towards monetizing their business model, specifically considering that most of the investors have started looking towards monetization being an idle aspect for startups?
I think this question is a kind of a question that does not make sense. If you are creating value you will not have to struggle for monetization. Only when you're not creating value, the equation shifts and you have to give discounts. I don't see these things truly shifting in that direction, right? If you have to give discounts to get the customers, I cannot imagine how will you ever charge them 5%, 10% extra for a behavior that is reversible, right? And that is my biggest challenge to that, and therefore monetization makes sense for, let's say, a media company saying that let me just gather 5 million captive customers to view my content and then place ads of other companies who will compete with that. But to create value, you have to create something that people truly value and want to pay money for, right? In India, like I said, we are all internet companies have been traditionally peddling convenience. But what if people are not time poor? So these questions are not being asked. I don't think Indian entrepreneurs that I have seen are curious enough to go and find insights. They're very happy because they can code, they can probably understand few business models from abroad. They just start working on something and don't really probe what is truly out there as core insights. I'll give you a small example. I was talking to a company that is doing credit rating. And I asked him that, what's your model? He's like, oh, we allow banks and others to charge us 50 rupees for every credit rating ping. I was like, have you ever considered asking a marriage portal if they want to give credit rating? Because arranged marriage is a very India thing, and wouldn't a person who's getting their daughter married will want to know credit rating of the person who is a prospective groom over here? And how much would they pay? They found out that they were willing to pay up to 10,000 rupees for one credit rating. Now, these kind of thinkings are not being applied because this sounds like an absurd idea if I tell somebody invest that, hey, in an arranged marriage, a father will want to know if the credit rating of the potential groom is good or not. It's a different thing when you think about monetization. So you have to find insights first.
The second question which has come in is, what is your view on the payment space in general, and what kind of business models in the payment space do you think would be there?
Payment space has suddenly got hot because of demonetization, but again, applying the same framework, cash remains Delta 4 for most people, even now. And as cash is back, they're going to move back to that behavior. Expecting that this country is going to become cashless immediately is hard. The reason is, there is no core motivation to wanting to, for the merchants who have been traditionally only on cash, to disclose their incomes completely, right? We have not created enough penalties or punishments for them. We've made it hard during this 50 days period when there was no cash, and suddenly you saw many merchants wanting to adopt digital. Expecting it to be a behavior to going forward is something that is hard. What has happened because of the overheating of the space, the consumer is confused with the options. If you go to an IRCTC page, look at the payments page. I mean, like there are like 200 options that you can pick from, right? And therefore, the consumer is getting confused more than, like, there are every day new options coming. There is a Bheem app, there is Paytm, there is Freecharge, there is debit card companies trying to push that, and credit card companies. The consumer just wants to pay, and they are going back to the bold default behavior of it's okay, let's just pay by cash and do things. So use cases have to be created through habits, and I think companies that focus on habits before reach will win eventually, because that will become a default setting for a lot of people, and behavior will be built on top of that. I think creating solutions without spending time on what the problem is the real challenge I see in a lot of payment space. I see many companies coming up with little differentiation. For example, Freecharge became a payments company by offering a simple model. We said for every amount of recharge you do on our platform, you get equal value coupons of different retailers against that. So if you do a 200 rupees recharge, you got 200 rupees coupons, and that's how we entered into a consumer transaction space and built our business. If you're expecting that I'll just create a platform where banks will come together and I'll put some stickers at some stores, I don't think behavior can happen based on that. So my view on payment space, expecting it to be becoming digital just because we've got a change that has happened in the last 50 days, I don't think so. A lot of work has to be done. I believe many companies are doing some interesting things. But I think, again, hyper-competitive space, companies that are doing quiet job and large companies are not even known to most people. The biggest payments companies, I can tell you the whole room probably doesn't know the name of those companies also. And that's the beauty about those companies.
Thanks, Kunal. The next question that we have is, what industries or sectors do you think in India are ripe for a Delta 4 change?
Every human behavior is ripe for a Delta 4 change as long as you can create a solution that is Delta 4. Nothing is ripe. Everything is ripe. Humans love to move. If you come and invent and tell me, Kunal, there's a pill which gets rid of this, is this ripe for disruption? No. But give me a solution that is Delta 4, I'll give up this thing. So I don't know why, I'm sorry, I dropped out of MBA, I told you that, right? So I think differently. So for me, everything is about human behavior and shifting human behavior. And humans love to become efficient constantly. Imagine somebody comes from 1916 today and looks at the world. They'll think we are all gods. Look at the stuff that we can do. So we are constantly becoming more efficient, and everything is ripe for disruption as long as you have a Delta 4 solution.
Thanks, Kunal. There's one more question which has come in, which is, what are the challenges which you faced while scaling up free charge?
Yeah, so I think the challenges were quite similar. We had a unique challenge that I had a tough time convincing talent to join me. Philosophy graduate, dropped out, but we had huge amount of transactions from day one. So by month 2, we were already doing like 15,000 transactions a day. And nobody would believe it. In fact, that was a classic conversation. Shailendra from Sequoia met me and asked me how many transactions do I do. And I told him 15,000. And he's like, per month? I said, no, it's per day. And I could not believe myself that, am I looking at my numbers wrong? Because nobody's asked this question. And second question, he asked me, what's your CAC? Which stands for customer acquisition cost. I had no clue what that word meant, because I had not incurred a single dollar to acquire customers. So a lot of times, I have seen that the struggles are different for a lot of people. For me, the challenge was I had to get talent to come to my office and look at the servers and look at the actual transactions. At least 7, 8 top talent, I had to get them to office to look at. A couple of them actually had to go to my board meeting to convince them that this is for real. So good problems I had. But once we had great talent initially, we could hire a lot more after that.
Thank you so much, Kunal. With
Cool.
that, we come to the end of your session, and I'll ask Ayush to take the stage. Thank
Perfect.
you.
Thank you so much.
Aman's going to give you a quick memento. Yeah, Aman's just going to give a quick memento. Thanks so much. So time to move on to our investing panel. The goal of the panel is to get a good 60,000-foot view on what's going on in the Indian entrepreneurial ecosystem. The panel will cover topics such as the current investment climate, emerging areas of opportunity, and factors influencing exits for now established startups. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce the moderator of the panel and the panelists, and I request them to come up as I introduce them. So the panel is moderated by Professor Karthik Hosnagar. Karthik is a professor of technology and digital business at the Wharton School of the University of Pennsylvania. Karthik's research work focuses on the digital economy, in particular internet media, internet marketing, and e-commerce. Karthik was a co-founder of Yodel, has served on the advisory board of Milo and Monetate, and is involved with other startups as either an investor or a board member. Karthik, please come up to stage. Our first panelist is Mr. Sumit Thadani. Sumit is an entrepreneur and hands-on technology leader with deep product experience and a track record of building amazing products and teams from the ground up. He was a founding member of Presto, LimeWire, and PointZap teams. The next panelist is Mr. Nipun Mehra. Nipun is a technology investor with Sequoia Capital India. His focus areas at Sequoia are commerce and content, amongst others. Some of the companies he works with are Nearby, Daily Hunt, and Urban Ladder. Prior to joining Sequoia, Nipun was at Flipkart, where he led the P&L for general merchandise categories, including books, beauty, toys, and baby businesses. Next is Rehan Yar Khan. Rehan is managing partner of Rise Venture Partners. He's been an entrepreneur since 1992, building 3 companies, and was also closely involved in the establishment of Indian Angel Network and Harvard Angels. He's the co-chair of India VC Association's Manage in India Council and a member of the Venture Capital Council. Next up is Mr. Sumit Modi. He's a general partner at Health Passion Fund, co-founded by Dr. Huz Kharakiwala. He has previously held private equity roles at SL Finance, Primerica BHI, and Rhodius Partners. Sumit also acts as an investor and mentor to promising startups in the education and media space. Last up is Mr. Venkat Nageshwar. Mr. Venkat Nageshwar is currently the Deputy Managing Director in charge of the Global Markets Vertical of State Bank of India. He has vast all-round experience spanning over 32 years covering different aspects of banking. He also sits in the investment committee, heads the FinTech Fund and other sector-agnostic VC funds at SBI. So with that, a round of applause for our esteemed panelist and moderator, and I hand it over to Karthik.
Thanks, Ayush. Thank you all for being here. So what I'm going to do is get the conversation started and open it up to questions the last 15, 20 minutes or so. And in terms of themes to explore, there's a number of themes I want to explore today. I'll start off by perhaps comparing the Indian ecosystem with other ecosystems outside, and especially from an investor perspective. So perhaps my first question, I'll pose it to Rehan, who's seated at the center. And this is a question about the scale of the opportunity and what's happening in this ecosystem over the last year. So there's been a lot of reports about a lot of investors putting brakes on investments. Certainly, I don't know about the number of investments, but the size of these investments, the check sizes do seem to have come down. And the question is this a temporary blip, or is there a more fundamental issue? And I was trying to think about the fundamental issue in terms of what is the scale of the opportunity in India. And one rough metric I have is if you look at, say, US GDP versus Indian GDP, US GDP is roughly 9 to 9.5 times India's GDP. And if you look at the amount of capital that went into the VC space in the US versus India in 2015, in India versus US was roughly about 6 times that of India. So already in terms of GDP versus investment size, that ratio, India skews a little bit where there's more money going in. And especially at a time when in the US, a lot of VCs have been struggling to produce returns. There's a conversation of, is VC market in US overfunded? I want to ask you a little bit about, is the Indian market overfunded, and in particular, how do you think of it in terms of the scale of the opportunity here?
Sure. Thanks, Karthik. Well, I'd like to remind you that India is growing at a faster rate than the US. So maybe, that kind of accounts for some of that gap. 6 times versus 9 times, differential in funding. Let's keep in mind we're an emerging country. The US is a developed country. So you're gonna have kind of innovation on top of that. Here, you have a lot of white space filling as well, right? So I'm sure a lot of that capital will be used, towards creating brands and kind of infrastructural kind of stuff, which probably already existed in the US. We're doing a lot of stuff, for example, around payments over here, and a lot of investments have been absorbed into that. So while I can't answer that accurately, that could potentially be the reason. I'd also like to point out that the Indian, whether funding dries up in 2016 or has been lower than 2015 or whatever you'd like to call it, I believe that the rate of growth of consumers, 30 million transacting users, probably going to about 100 million online transacting users by 2020. I suppose that fundamental stays in place. The dollar spends which are likely to emerge online, as well as the increase in disposable income. I think those fundamentals probably stay in place. So I'd like to think that a lot of the gap, a lot of this funding will probably be absorbed because you're a developing nation, not just because of innovation.
That's a fair point. So your argument is it's growth explains a lot of the gap, and of course the fact that there's more white space here.
That's right.
I guess one more pushback, and I'll pose this to Nipun to keep the conversation moving, is in terms of profitability, right? So let's say growth accounts for that difference. The question is, for every dollar or 100 rupees invested, are you producing the same amount of profits? And you have an interesting, I guess, shoes here. First, you're at Sequoia, and you guys raise, globally, and so you have to convince an LP that, say, the Indian opportunity is as attractive as, say, the US opportunity. But the other shoes you wear is you're a former Flipkart guy, and so I think profitability is a good question to ask a former Flipkart person. And these are not Flipkart numbers, but I've seen several numbers from multiple companies, and I'll give you one, which you're likely very familiar with anyway, I was looking at e-commerce companies, a number of them, and I saw that roughly the customer acquisition cost in India for these companies is roughly about a fourth of the customer acquisition cost in the US. In contrast, the average revenue per user was roughly a tenth. So it just means you spend some amount to acquire the user, you're not going to get the same amount of revenues here as the US. And so there's this, again, this imbalance between acquisition costs versus ARPU. How do you think about the profitability issue in general?
I think probably the curveball question, yeah. I think it's as you mentioned, there's a Flipkart hat, there's a Sequoia hat, but honestly, there's just like one India hat, which is the reality of the ecosystem. Yes, CAC numbers have increased, but I think one anecdote from a while ago, I think Flipkart wasn't always in where it is today. You know, some of it is competitive dynamics force companies to, when you have to spend more on CAC. And yes, ARPUs are lower just because of the macro factors, the stuff that we were talking about. In fact, if instead of GDP, you would have compared GDP per capita, that contrast would have been much, much greater than what you indicated earlier, right? So your ARPUs are coming from that, and your CACs are coming from what is the ability of a company to spend, to buy, to have that customer try. And that's where all the gap is coming from. Now, most people are looking at the end state versus the today's state, and you're willing to take an educated guess that there are things with the way the indicators are moving, that there is light at the end of the tunnel. That's sort of why we're all here.
Okay, so you both have made cases for, I guess, the case for India, and while acknowledging the challenges here. So again, as I think about from an investment standpoint or a venture standpoint, I think about scale, I think about profitability, and then I think about liquidity as well. The ability to exit investments. And I'll pose this question to Mr. Venkat Nageshwar, because at SBI you run fund of funds, you invest in other venture funds, you have two funds of your own. So how does one think about exits? I mean, it's pretty well known that there are not as many acquirers here as elsewhere. The ability to IPO isn't quite the same here as the US, especially when it comes to the expectation of profitability among investors. So as either as a fund, as somebody running a fund, or as a fund of funds, how do you think about liquidity and exiting investments?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for the question, and thanks for having me here. One of the first things, one of the biggest challenges that we have in the VC space is exits. Of course, the initial returns and the exit is something which is very, very challenging, and particularly in the startup space. Today's in the SEBI regulations does stipulate that minimum 50% institutional investors are required. And that's going to be a smaller challenge for the exit route. The second thing that we also look at is when compared to the Western space, what we have, there are various group of investors who can take part in this investment and take over from the original investors, like the endowment funds or the family funds, or even for that matter, pension funds. In India, that's another challenge that we are facing. But as we evolve, as we move forward, things would become easier. But in State Bank of India, when we're looking at venture capital funds, we are mostly into the growth funds. And that's where it's all the more, a bit more easier for us to exit.
I see. I'm going to pose that same question to Sumit Modi as well. You're raising an early stage fund, and so for you, the timeline to an exit is even greater than somebody who's a late stage investor or a fund of funds investing in the institutional. So how do you guys justify the exit timelines to LPs and so on as you are trying to raise these funds?
So our exit is primarily going to be via sale to other investors. Nevertheless, on a portfolio level, we see a potential to integrate some of the companies that we have invested in. And we are very focused on one sector. So therefore, we see some integration possibilities within different players across sub-verticals in the same sector. So that will actually help us a little. But nevertheless, our exit is going to be via creating stronger startups so that other funds, which are stage 2, stage 3 investors, can buy into our stories. So that is how we're looking to make an exit.
Okay.